Welcome back to TechPoutine. I feel like we're now back to regular cadence after our first episode was April. So it's like I didn't want to say anything there, but really excited to be recording again with you guys. What do you want to talk about? I think there's a few good items on the docket. There's this 2-letter buzzword everyone's talking about lately, right? Of course, I think the big topic these days is AI and how it's impacting society. I think maybe in terms of company building, one piece of news that came out we could talk about is the largest Canadian tech company called Shopify has done a very public memo about they're going to be AI first. I guess the general question there is, okay, how does it really change how we build companies, right? So maybe Eleonore, to use like you get a front seat with your portfolio. How do you see it impacting in the nuts and bolts how companies operate?
And it's funny because I'm like thinking about what I'm going to say because this is the first time that by the time we publish this episode online, I might sound like an idiot, whatever I say today. It's changing so fast. But no, I think we spent a lot of time at Brightspark again as VC investors thinking about what do we want to see in new companies we invest in? And most importantly, how do we see the companies we invested in a few years ago adapt to really what does it mean to be AI native and so on? And I think one of our partners really summed it down to a good idea, which is if you're trying to attach AI in a company that is run by human work, it will fail. So rebuilding from a standpoint of most of the work done by AI supervised by human, it's just a different way to think about how you build a team. And it's super interesting to see very large companies in terms of account like Shopify do that shift. And I can imagine it's not an easy thing to push through hundreds, if not thousands of employees. We have a few companies like Hopper, obviously, in our portfolio that are going through something similar. And it's really interesting to see where it lands in terms of how those teams at scale look like 18 months from now.
That's an interesting take, right? Because if you go back a year or two ago, every CEO in North America was talking about AI and they just poured all kinds of money into it. And then a year later, we heard, oh, all these things failed, right? And likely because of that point, which is if it's a business built on human actions, integrating AI is not as easy as you might think. But when you're starting from scratch, completely different story.
One conversation I had with one of our portfolio company that sells more of an AI orchestration security tool, like true enterprise customers, very large customers. Like they're a pre-seed company, they're still very early, but they've been into a customer discussion. They go to all the QCon conferences and so on. And one thing the CEO was said, he just came back now from a month of traveling to those conferences. Now the narrative changed. For a while, he was like at all the dev conferences and people were like, it's funny, no one wants to talk about AI, but all the vendors on the floor are AI companies or AI tool companies. And now everyone is, we actually started deploying projects inside our company and everything's breaking. And now we need all the tooling and the infrastructure around it. So it feels like we're reaching a tipping point where a lot of industries now are really adopting it.
Are you saying it's the old build or buy approach where the companies started building themselves and now they're realizing that they better...
A little bit of both. I think there's still a lot of buy and not every company is well geared to, kind of building stuff, but at least they're buying and implementing different projects. And now they're starting to see where things break and a lot of issues about information being shared inside the company and data privacy, all of that. But the core point is more that there used to be a lot of pilot projects or things that never really reach in production or really deployed, and now it feels
built
like we're
internally.
at that tipping point now.
Yeah. Is there a framework that you guys use to define what is a AI company versus a company using AI? Like, where is that? It feels like almost every company should be using AI right now in terms of their operations.
I've always been like a generalist investor, and I was in a VC then, but some partners of the firm went through the .com era and the mobile era and so on, and it's like, it didn't mean any. At first, people were like, oh, I'm a mobile company. And now it's like, obviously, you need to be building for mobile. It's the same thing with AI, where we might have a few companies that we really consider more foundational AI work, but it's more, you should be building with AI, not just, thinking about it. But that's a given now. It's like table stake.
Okay. Is part of the criteria that you are developing your own foundational model to be considered a core AI or
not necessarily?
Not necessarily.
But to that point, that's why the news from Shopify is really interesting, right? Because clearly they were not an AI first business, obviously. Yeah. And for a company of that scale to say, we're going to be that means like major transformation of everything that they do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're not the only one, right?
No, I know, but I'm just
Yeah.
using
Well,
that
and in
'cause
terms
close
of a
home,
large
yeah.
company that's going through a big change, I don't know if you guys saw the update from Jack Dorsey from Block,
Yeah, yeah.
laying off 40,000 people or
Mhm.
20,000 or 40% of the staff,
Right.
which equates to thousands of
Yeah.
people. And he spoke about it on the pod, which on a podcast, which I found interesting. His whole thing is exactly to what you said is he's trying to reposition it as to the brain of the company is going to be, this AI that they're developing and all the decisions map around that. And I guess your question, Gabriel, was like, what does it mean to be AI? Like,
Because the product itself is not necessarily changing.
Well,
It's
that's it,
more
yeah.
we're going to use the tools to be able to be more efficient.
But if you think of the last cycle, right? The last big cycle, like Uber. Is Uber a technology company, right? Or is it like a transportation company? That's,
Yeah. Because-
which bucket do they
Yeah.
fall into? It's the same question, right? I don't think you need to be developing specifically a foundational model, but you could be sitting on top of them. Cursor is a good example, like pretty much an AI company, but it's all Anthropic on the back end, right?
But I don't know how much you can talk about it, but I was talking to some folks at Hopper, and it sounds like they're actually thinking about reinventing the company through an AI first lens versus just using AI tools to be more efficient.
Yeah, and we have a few companies, Upper being one, where they're really going through the exercise of like, okay, what if we scrap the entire code and we start from scratch? And it's crazy. And Fred, the CEO, was giving this example of for A/B testing a bunch of things on the app or with marketing, where with AI you can probably do 50,000 different
Like
tests
iterations
in the same hour,
Right,
exactly,
yeah.
versus having A or B testing. That's just changed the full dynamic. And I think when we talk with companies that are starting today, now it's pretty much across the tier one companies that the software engineers are not really touching code or are told by CEOs you shouldn't touch code. But like when this trickles to other function, because obviously the LLMs started really, the first thing they really attacked well was code. But then when you get like, when your finance folks or marketing folks are like not touching marketing or not touching finance, or when your lawyer doesn't read an agreement anymore. So I think this is where we'll see that into more jobs and function, and that will even further redefine how companies are being scaled today.
Hopper's an interesting one because of just where they started as a company, right? It's almost, you can imagine the first iteration of Hopper with AI would have been this super powerful agent that could help you.
It would have been a lot faster, I can tell you that.
Yeah,
But I didn't
exactly.
use Hopper at the beginning.
Well, they did use AI, just it's called machine learning, right?
Right. Yeah, the first iteration.
Yeah, and it's a good segue about what happened to your point, Eleonore, about what happens with all the rest of the economy, right? We're talking about traditional businesses, right? And you were talking about how you're looking at that space from an intellectual curiosity perspective of what happens to manufacturing, what happens to all these companies that don't have this, right? We can think of the apex predator today being Anthropic and how it's really unprecedented what they're doing, right? It's like they're basically eating their own dog food using Claude code to build the next version, right? And shipping at a terrifying speed, and also
It only starts to compound, right? Which is scary.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could talk about maybe the singularity later, but yeah, what are you thinking about? What does this mean for other companies that haven't understood anything that we're talking about here today?
Yeah, it's really an interesting time if we really think about the Quebec province and what's happening. We hear a lot in the radio about, or everywhere in the media, about all these SMBs that are transferring or looking to transfer eventually to the next generation of succession plans because they don't have a child or a cousin or a friend who wants to take this over. And most of those companies are manufacturing companies. And you look at that as a huge opportunity for, I think, the younger generation, particularly who are in school now, who are like, what am I going to do when I finish with my bachelor's degree as a lawyer when basically AI is going to eat up my job, right? And so there's an interesting time to look at what do you do with these companies that need to exist, these SMBs that need to continue to flourish for the economy, for the regions, for everywhere, and these younger generation who comes out of school with not necessarily joining Meta because that's where you would go, but they could take all this new knowledge through AI and really transform the way manufacturing is happening today.
Yeah,
And the people in those roles, right? The founder who started this company 40 years ago has no idea what AI can do to their business. But the younger generation, I think there's a real opportunity there.
Yeah, there's a really great moment in time where you have two mega trends intersecting at the same time in terms of this massive transfer of businesses from baby boomers to the next generation. And like you're saying, the next generation is more comfortable using the tools. And
There's
so I think
16,000 SMBs that are looking to transfer to the next generation a year in Quebec alone.
Curious, like I find there's multiple trends intersecting, right? So if you look at the birth rate, it's like it's not going in the right direction at all. And all these people are retiring, right? So what happens to these businesses, right? So I think part of the answer is going to be robotics, right? Where you look at these supply chains of production, it's like super old school. Like in my old company, we had a few businesses that were from like the natural resource area and like visiting Rivière-du-Loup, and like they could have been 1972, be no difference. And so it's, all these areas are really ripe for innovation.
There's huge, like, let's call them traditional industries that have not adopted tech in the way that other industries have, right? Like you think of the electrician market, right? There's got to be tons of ways to optimize that. Like we will always need electricians. How can you apply tech, specifically AI, to optimize a company that may have 20 or 30 trucks on the road? There's got to be tons of ways to increase profitability, increase efficiency, and even grow the sales. And, most of the people who start those businesses don't have that knowledge.
I think what's tricky is a lot of young people are not excited about these roles or these opportunities to work in manufacturing or being an electrician. But there's, I think, somewhat of a cultural shift that's happening, and more people are considering them. And from what I understand, the biggest issue is there's a massive inefficiency in terms of passing on knowledge from the experienced electrician to the next generation, just because there's a bottleneck around the experienced electricians or tradespeople.
Yeah, and I assume there's going to be, at least for a generation, shift where if you work behind a computer and the kind of the profession that has been super well regarded, like lawyers, investment bankers, and so on, again, if AI makes that entry work at least like more of a commodity, then it's possible that there's going to be a higher premium paid for the manual human work. Even general contractors used to. Now I see a lot of people that end up going through all the way to university and start a business at that, just because, again, it makes sense. And if you have a good business acumen paired up with the technical skills to do the manual work, you can really be in a well position for yourself. So I think given that, and that there's going to be even most likely a bigger shortage of labor because people will retire in those different industries, it might create a really good opportunity for a generation. Eventually, robotics will get into, and maybe some of these jobs will be a bit more commoditized, or it will change the dynamic. But
and the industry has realized that, right? You can get a loan, almost funded at 100%, to take over an established business of that nature. So if you come in, you acquire a business that has opportunity for innovation with tech, it's already doing $2, $3, $4, $5 million a bit. That's a good investment. If you've got the business acumen, the education, and the technical skill, you can really turn something really interesting with that.
Tying it back to Shopify for a second, right? I see them as the entrepreneurship company, right? Toby went on record recently saying that the only future-proof job is the entrepreneur, right? It's like the person figuring it out. What are your views on the junior entry? We finish university, we look for jobs. Every cycle, there's not enough jobs in Canada or Montreal or whatever. Does it change for this cycle? Do we think, there actually will not be entry-level jobs for the people that are not ready to be entrepreneurs? Or is that a little bit overblown? And I'll share my opinion. Maybe I want to hear.
We were talking about it before. It's hard to tell people who have young kids what path they should take in terms of education, because the world is changing so fast. And a lot of the jobs that were considered the most attractive jobs, that are knowledge jobs, are likely not going to still exist in the same way. So it's hard to say. I think it's good to get experience as quickly as possible. I think, at least on my end, I'm encouraging my children to get a hands-on experience as fast as possible versus going down a path of being in school for 5 years, 10 years. The world's going to be so different from when you go into school versus when you get out.
Yeah, I agree. I think overall, I'm an optimist that this technology, like most previous technologies, will make the world a better place and will improve quality of life and will create a lot of jobs that we can't even imagine today. But there's going to be a correction period, most likely, where, again, if you just spend 6-7 years educating yourself, getting the diplomas in a specific job that used to be with tons of opportunities for entry position, that suddenly then it's hard to accept that, again, going back to entrepreneurial roots, pivot and find something else for yourself, so I think there's going to be a zone of just discomfort for some of that generation, but I'm pretty positive that eventually we'll create, or we'll have, universal income, and that will be another society altogether.
What was
The
your
end of
position?
capitalism,
You said
but
you were going to hold your position.
Yeah, I started my career as search engine marketing, right? It's like it didn't exist like 2-3 years before, and now there's thousands of these roles, right? So I just think Eleonore said it. It's like we can't imagine what the roles are going to
they'll
be.
new.
Because do you feel with these AI tools that you're working less or you're working more? It's like pretty sure we're all working more, right? So it hasn't saved. We're not like on the couch doing nothing.
Yeah.
But it does become a question of shifting, right? Like where does value accrue? And I'm not as worried of all the jobs disappearing, etc. And I see it like to your point, Eleanor, it's obviously in a positive light.
Yeah.
When I hear Toby talk about entrepreneurs, to me, to be an entrepreneur, you have to be a problem solver. You need to find solutions or problems that are opportunities that people are not thinking about. But you have to be creative, and you need to use the tools that you have at your disposal. So I think everybody should learn how to have those skills, because those are probably the most important skills. And then we'll still be working with other humans, right? And so understanding how to build relationships and how to interact with people and how to communicate, leveraging the tools that will exist will be important, but it'll still be important to work in teams. So there's some like fundamental skills that I think are important that people should lean into. I also think I can imagine a world where people may pay to have junior roles at companies, right? Like in today's world, you'll finish university, you'll go get a job, and you'll start as a junior, whatever engineer. We might see a shift where you're actually paying the company to get that experience, because the reality is the company doesn't need you to do that work, but the value you get working with someone intermediate or senior is so high that you might be willing to pay that person or that company.
That's interesting.
So I have a question for you, Gabriel, and you, Eleonore, because you both talked about going through school and working for the paper and for the diploma, for the job that's steady and all that. And you said, I'm trying to teach my kids to get hands-on experience. But what role, if any, do the institutions play in that education? Like universities are universities and colleges are colleges and secondary schools are secondary schools, but like they're not going to learn this stuff unless the institutions teach them that you got to do more than just chase that.
I guess
that degree, right?
That's what I'm suggesting is the.
But you're one person.
But that would shift
with two children. How do you do that for the mass population?
Yeah, and my main worry when you look at society, and especially here in North America, like I fear that the gap between richer educated families that are having this discussion versus the ones that do not and really rely on the public sector, which as in like even in a society like Quebec is still like very not funded enough, and will probably take another like 5 to 10 years to figure out how to adapt to this new reality, how much of a gap of chances in life the two kids at the same age they will have going forward because of those conversation and that mindset.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to answer your question. I do think society or the government has a role to play in terms of subsidizing the ability for young people to get that experience. For families that have the means, like I would pay, or I would have for myself, paid for the opportunity to spend the first couple of years I working at the companies I worked at, whether that was my first role in product at the hedge fund I was working at, or whether that was the first couple of years I was working at Real Ventures. I was learning. There was probably more value going in my direction than value I was creating for the company. Even though I got paid for those jobs, you can just imagine like the paradigm can shift. And it's what's happening with co-ops to a certain extent.
Yeah.
It's like when you're doing a co-op, you're getting paid, but really, would you pay to have that job? Most likely.
That's a good point. Yeah, we talk about STEM. It's like we need to add another E, right? It's like teaching kids to be more adaptable, entrepreneurship, right? The second E, and I think these AI tools are going to be to a large extent also the answer, right? It's like think of teaching today, right? Go to elementary, you sit at class, like no one's paying attention, and it's like kids in front of a teacher for 8 hours. Just if you have a AI oracle that's like ever patient, ever knowing, that could also adapt to your kid's style. Pretty sure we're going to raise the floor of what it means to be educated, right? And
I think through all the transformation of the last 100 years, the classroom still looks the same.
Exactly. That's like, what area that change.
And with the evolution of AI now, like we talked about, like a month from now, this conversation is going to be irrelevant. How does the school, the institution adapt to that when it hasn't changed in that.
There isn't any examples I can think of locally, but
Yeah.
there's a few examples in the US of AI first schools that are being developed.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Alpha School in Austin, I believe. I saw something that they had like a session or like an introduction session in Toronto. And so maybe that's coming to Canada. Are you familiar with the
No, I'm
Alpha
not.
School?
But imagine that gets adopted. Who's going to go to that? To your point. Because that's not going to be funded by the government. It's going to be a private school at $25K a year or something like that.
Yeah.
So that doesn't solve the
a
problem.
larger question.
Yeah, it
is,
gives those maybe we're targeting the elites with this, right? It's a good
It's really
question.
an interesting problem.
Yeah,
But this becomes a
Things are
political
moving,
challenge that you have to adapt the tools. You can't say we're gonna fund,
things are moving so fast that our constructs for making decisions and changing how society work are just going to be broken. And our friends who were sitting in the Startup Fest studio, I'm guessing Alistair and team are talking about a lot of this stuff in terms of how inefficient the government is and what we can do to bring it to the next level. It's super relevant. It's probably the most relevant it's ever been.
One thing just to wrap on the education side, it's a discussion we had a lot internally recently where same way as the computer or even the calculator made you not as good as mental math, I do feel like the AI makes you a bit more lazy intellectually at the very least, or feel like we're stepping even further away from the ability to absorb and distill long-form content in a way where you still need critical judgment. Because if you've never learned how to think and how to have an opinion for yourself, and you're just whatever Anthropic is telling me is the right answer for this, I just I think there's a case to be made to go back to OG education and learning philosophy and writing with a pen and paper at the same time.
Listen to long-form podcasts. That makes me think of this app called Blink. It's like books in 5 minutes. Right? I don't believe any of that shit. If you want to decide a book, you got to read it, right? So I think that's the challenge, right? With people that are growing up with these tools, that you get the dopamine hit every 8 seconds.
Yeah, we're definitely lucky to be in a position where we had the experience of working pre all these tools and have the judgment to understand whether they're doing a good job or a bad job.
Yeah.
And when I'm using the tools to build a financial model, I understand whether it's making a mistake or not because I have the experience, but it's still making me 10x more productive in building it.
Yeah. On the same topic of entrepreneurship, to change to the next topic about creative destruction, right? I think we have the preface here is we all have a bias that we think that new companies, new startups is a good thing for society, right? So that's very much our bias and probably argue pretty well for it. The government, I think, hopefully is recognizing this, right? So there's been in the latest federal budget, like $750 million earmarked for tech, for startups. And there's a big debate right now. So I think it's very timely that we contribute in a small fashion. The debate is, does it go to growth rounds or does it go to early stage, right? So one side led by CVCA, Mr. Benjamin Bergen, which I think is really smart, he's arguing it should go to growth because the argument there is that a lot of the big growth rounds are being led by the US. And then NACO, the Angel Group, is arguing, hey, no, early stage. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts. I know this is more an Eleonore Nectar chat. It is Ian and Gabriel, but maybe before Eleonore get into it, what do you guys think about this topic?
I can go first, and I've been on both sides of the coin, as we both have been on both sides of the coin. My view is, how can there be large growth scale rounds if there's no early stage startups in the beginning, right? So you need to fuel the smaller companies that hopefully eventually will become the large companies. Shopify was not always the size that it was. It was a tiny company with one person at the beginning. So I do think that a large portion of that 750, if not all of it, should definitely be focused on creating more companies. The more companies there are, the higher likelihood there are some of them will come out in late stage. And when they hit that stage, then let's put more money into it at that time. But right now, what we need is more early stage companies being created to create those big opportunities.
Yeah, I'm definitely biased. I've worked only in early stage. I was a VC in early stage. And so I see the leverage that happens when you invest in early stage in terms of company creation, not just in the companies themselves, but the people that come out of those companies as well, which I don't think is talked about enough. And so I see a huge benefit in investing early stage. The reality is the US is the capital market for the entire world. I think if we pour in $750 million into late stage, people are still going to go get money from the US. People are still going to go public on the NASDAQ or New York Stock Exchange. And so while I think it'd be great to retain more ownership in Canada, I think the impact of backing a few Canadian companies and keeping a portion of that ownership in Canada isn't as impactful as creating 100 more Shopifys. And the only way to do that is pour more money in. Honestly, we talked about it a little bit. I'm surprised that people have that perspective when there's so much data. There's the RBC report that came out, and I think the CVCA report that came out that was saying there's a massive gap at pre-seed and seed right now. And it's the largest it's been, I think, since 2013 or something. I was listening to a podcast with Matt Roberts from RBC talking about it. And so, yeah, I'm just surprised. I'm surprised that's a question on the table.
Yeah, I think if I look at it from just really a framework perspective, if you raise money from outside of Canada at the pre-seed or seed stage, there's very little chance you end up raising your growth round from a Canadian investor because you're just now in different networks.
Yep.
So I think if we don't fix the early stage, I don't have a strong opinion on how much money should go to whatever. And I think at the end, we need constant capital, more private capital in this industry in Canada. I think the fact that we're at the start of a new tech cycle, for return, I would put more money into early stage than growth companies. Or maybe there's probably a ton of growth companies struggling right now, but not sure if it's the best use of the dollars to back those companies. Maybe some of them should reinvent themselves and so on. But I think if we miss this cycle to back great, again, companies building in this AI cycle doesn't have to be an AI company per se, but then we're going to lose as Canada. It's our time to really make sure we are, and not just that we're backing more companies, but the ones with the real ambition, real potential, that we're not spoon feeding them with $1 or $2 million when the US counterpart raised a $50 million seed. We need to be able to write those meaningful check and support these companies to go big and more ambitious from the get-go. And if there's no capital at the early stage, then we'll just lose all these ambitious founders to our South neighbors.
I think that point about if you raise seed, pre-seed, even A round with a US investor, you're basically almost out of the Canadian market.
Yeah,
that's a really good
Your
point.
chances of raising capital after that in the US are so much dramatically higher than coming back to a Canadian VC.
Yeah, and all the narrative about Canadian founders leaving Canada and raising from the US, and it's always goes back to the first believers, the first backers were US based versus Canadian. Here I go and I move my company to San Francisco and it just doesn't really look back.
That's a good point. I don't hear about it talked enough. Really, I've seen it with a lot of founders. When you raise your pre-seed or your seed, like you said, the most likely path is to raise from a US investor because that's the relationships your investors have.
Exactly.
Exactly. And maybe I'll contribute a bit. First off, it's hard to not agree with you. So obviously I'm on the same vantage point. On the other side, the argument is, I listened to the podcast with Matt that Ben did as well. But it was good. I get the argument of, we have these few Canadian champions. And then when it comes to raise a big round, a $15 million round, guess where the money comes from? Most of it comes from a US lead. And we don't have those Canadian leads that could underwrite a $15 million check. Fine, I get it. But Ian, to your point, is if you want growth companies, where are they going to come from? Right? So this Series B and C. And then the other thing why I'm opposed to it is it's also a Band-Aid solution, right? It was, okay, once in a 4-year envelope disappears, so I feel like
we
we're
need something structurally.
So we're tackling it at the wrong place in the stack. And it's not there that you're going to solve it, right? So what we actually need to do is talk to these things that we have here, pension funds, and find a way to get them to be interested to actually underwrite these larger rounds, right? It's not like the myth of, there's not enough capital here in Canada. It's completely wrong. It's just like none of the money's going into this
doesn't
sector,
flow into that sector.
Doesn't flow into tech. So we need a more sustainable solution rather like a one-time fee or one-time line item in the budget. And then the other thing too is like you have these Canadian champions X today, but it's like just don't guarantee that these are going to be the long-term winners, right? This is like imagine one of those rounds went into the rental run where they raised 150 million or whatever it was, the largest B round at that time, and it's a company's a zero now, right? So versus if you take 50 million versus one bet versus let's say 100 or 50 bets, chances are to what you said, Ian, is I think the returns are going to be better, and B, it's going to be better in terms of, again, the federal government is thinking about economic development, where they're not a sophisticated LP. It goes back to like economic development.
It's like the streets in Montreal, right? If you fix the pothole, it's going to come back. But if you fix the street, then it's a long-term solution, right?
Yeah.
Like, which way are you going
I
to
think we
fix it?
need a little bit of both, honestly, on both topics. But I do agree as well that we shouldn't spoon feed a little bit of capital to a lot of companies. I almost feel like we're reverting away from that approach that initially happened, where a lot of money flowed into a lot of accelerators and incubators, and there were companies that were going and doing 3, 4, 5 incubators or accelerators and just getting 50K at a time.
Yeah.
It's not going to work that way. You need to make meaningful bets into
The right company.
into the right companies.
Or invest
The
in
right
funds
people.
like Brightspark, and directly. I think it's not the government's job to figure out where where the right bets are. Right, you need to give it to the private market to figure this out.
100%. That's not their role. Know your role, right?
Yeah.
No, it's true.
Yeah.
It's true. It's people like you guys that need to figure out where the money goes, not the government.
Yeah, because if we don't do well, we're not raising our next fund, right? The government, it's not going to go away. So it shouldn't be their role.
I think we may have spoken about it, but one of the things that I like in Canada on the, I think, mining exploration side is they have the concept of flow-through shares, where if you invest in a company as a private investment, the company can deduct their expenses or their losses. And so you can right away be able to deduct your investment from your income. And so that reduces your income tax. And so I think we need some structural changes like that to incentivize more individuals investing in angel rounds. And I also think we have a awareness issue. I don't find that a lot of people talk about their successful angel investments. I know a lot of founders that have returned really good returns, 10x returns to their angel investors, whether they pulled it out through an exit or a Series A. But word on the street is you shouldn't angel invest. Like when I talk to lawyers or accountants, like a lot of them say you shouldn't angel invest, but there are successful angel investors.
Yeah, there's the awareness issues. We'll go back to the overabundant supply of capital in Canada, like all these family offices, all these corporates. I'm not blaming them. It's like they don't know about how it works. The power law thing is not a thing. They don't understand power law at all, right?
Yeah.
So there's an awareness issue for sure.
Do you feel like we're slowly crawling out of it because of some companies like Shopify? It's hard to ignore the fact that the first or second, I don't know, depends on the quarter, most valuable company in Canada is a tech company. And so are we just in the early innings and we need more?
I think our ecosystem, and John Rudiger that was with RBCX did a really good job at explaining this with data, of that our ecosystem is 20 years behind the US. And also we're a much smaller country in terms of population than the US, and that will most likely always be the case. But in terms of just the maturity of the ecosystem, we're way younger than we'd like to believe, because yes, we've been doing this for decades and blah, blah, blah. But in terms of money going to work and the exit, we're maybe starting to see some of that. There's more champions and angel and like successful founders that can become angel investors that actually know what they're doing. And so we're at the start of that. And I do believe it will keep growing. But we're definitely still in the infancy of this ecosystem when you look at dollar amounts.
Yeah. I mean, you were saying it before. It is frustrating, though, because it feels like we're almost on the inverse of the cycles at a macro scale, where all of the money poured into the market in 2021 and it was the top of the market, and then everyone pulled out. And now is a once in a generation, maybe a lifetime opportunity to invest because of all the technology that's transforming the world. And there's no capital in Canada. Hopefully we don't miss it.
Yeah, that's tough. And even like when you look at what happened in 2020, 2021, those were really great years for all the firms and just the ecosystem that a lot of software assets ready to exit. But looking back at what we had in inventory that was from 2010, it was still pretty small because our industry in 2010 was still pretty small. So obviously we didn't make the same kind of returns that the US did because we didn't have that many mature companies ready to exit when it was the time to exit these kind of software companies. And now obviously we're at the start of a new cycle. So you would think it's the time to invest in seed and start companies and fund these companies.
Yeah,
but
like
now
we're always
stuck
like
with,
2 years
exactly. We're a bit
behind.
off. So Not sure
We're
what's
at
the
a new
trick.
start, but with a lot more maturity than we were in 2010.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the
Yes.
curve
Which makes
is
a big
going in
difference.
the right direction,
Yeah.
but the cycles feel a little bit off by 2 years relative to the rest of the market.
Yeah.
You shared a good article, Gabriel, about the capital concentrating, right?
Mhm.
So it's like the money going into venture capital in Canada has gone to a relatively handful number of funds.
Yeah, later stage funds.
More later stage or established. And obviously, you're like biased again because I have like an emerging manager fund one, and there's a crazy stat. I know you mentioned the RBCX report. I don't know if I mentioned the stat already on the pod, but so it's like emerging managers, funds 1, 2, 3, which we fall into, were fund one, which is the worst of that. The previous record in terms of lowest investment in the category was 2024. It was 1.8 billion invested in Canada, specifically in emerging funds. The new record was established last year. That number is 249 million.
Wow.
Based on this report. And it makes no sense. Amiral represents 1/6 of that, or what? It just makes no sense, right? There's this historic low. So of course, the founders are not yet, again, my perspective is you need emerging funds, smaller funds like
emerging
Spark,
funds,
Amiral,
yeah.
of a certain size to have closer relationship with founders. Because if not, what happens is that seed investor in the US that leads the round is like, they're going to connect them to the A investor that they're buddies with, right?
Yeah.
So that's the challenge.
One nice thing that came out of the 2021 cycle was I think that's when Inovia started their emerging manager fund. So it was nice to see that a later stage fund was recognizing the importance of emerging managers or early stage investors and creating their own vehicle to be able to get capital into that. So I don't know whose idea that was, but shout out to Chris and
big shout
folks.
out, and they're working on the next one. I'm talking to them, fingers crossed. Marianne, if you're listening.
Yeah.
But yeah, they did really well because I don't know if I could say this publicly, but they had some really good exits. There's a big company there's a company that got bought by NVIDIA. Q4.
Yes,
that there were a few Canadian funds in. So yeah, apparently
and that was through the Discovery Fund that I know if you got into that. So that's great. No, it's a very exciting model. So I'm happy to see them leaning in.
Okay, so on the AI topic, anyone have AI tools, latest tips and tricks, linking Granola to Claude, or like what's in your stack that like latest aha moments in terms of your day-to-day use?
On my end, I'm doing a big transition, like I think a lot of people, from ChatGPT to Claude, and really trying to re-establish or rebase my entire AI stack around that. Internally, we're leveraging Notion a lot as our center of truth. The Notion AI is pretty great. And so I think we talked about it last episode. It's super efficient, acting as almost as a product manager and project manager for us. And so it's really hooking all the tools together, whether it's Claude or Notion or whatever tool you're using as the center of truth is good to have. That way you can leverage the data that you have, right? It's all about bringing the data together.
Yeah, same thing on mine. I've completely switched off ChatGPT. No offense, I have nothing against OpenAI, but like when it comes to just connecting it to work tools, Claude has been crazy. And so yeah, connecting it to my desktop app, you like get to Granola. We're recording all internal calls and all startup calls, feeding it into Claude. And honestly, with a bit of memory, it's getting really good, right? Part of some of the snafus that we spoke about before, it's citing my emails with Fred and Nectar, but it's gotten really powerful now. It's just like, I can't imagine my workflow without it.
Yeah, we're the same. We moved from team or enterprise with OpenAI to now with Claude. We're still using, I think the next step for us is really centralizing the data where everyone uses it a ton. We have some shared folders and things, but really moving a lot of what would be like an ERP in a traditional business, like the OS of our fund all on it, which is the next step, I think, for us. And it's funny because we're now in renewal cycle with a lot of the tools like Affinity and Getro and all these things VCUs, and at a conference this week, and it feels like everyone is churning on those. So I think that's going to be...
It's cheap and it's works super well with Claude.
Exactly. So I think there's going to be a bit of and if it's true in VC, it's true in so many other industries.
Yeah. So time to short OpenAI and go long Anthropic. Sounds like everyone's making a shift. I hear it
I think the B2C side, though, maybe that's
OpenAI
a different conversation. I think they're getting the volume in terms of users is very impressive, but because they have less played the card that we're going to focus on work and enterprise solution. But it's really funny. Once a month, I go on both their websites and I look at their career page to see what kind of roles they're hiring for and give you some indication of like where they want to focus.
Priority,
exactly. Yeah. And so maybe I think that I wouldn't necessarily put my money on one of the two players. We'll see. And there might be still space for up and comers in the
So
industry.
we're recording this as they're doing their live stream, like in San
Yeah,
Francisco
everything.
right now.
Yeah.
With, like
Everything's
the
changing
latest
so
product launch.
quickly.
Maybe, what's the expression?
Yeah.
Putting our foot in our mouth.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, we regret the put. Oh, API is done. It's maybe they just release something that
Yeah.
solves
exactly.
solves.
They brought in the founder of OpenClaw, and so
Yeah.
maybe that's going to help reshift. They keep talking about focusing on the core product, but I saw last week that they acquired a fintech startup. And so, yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah.
a big company. There's a lot of movement for sure, but there's other players as well, right? A lot of people in my networks are talking about working with Perplexity. And so Perplexity launched their, I can't remember what it's called, but they have their
Computer, I think.
yeah, computer, I think. And so they're equivalent to OpenClaw. And so Perplexity is also an interesting platform. From what I understand, it allows you to leverage multi LLMs at the same time. And so it has less of a lock-in feeling than the other ones where you're stuck with the model that you have. With Perplexity, you can build around that. We're, like I was saying, internally using Notion to play that role. And so with Notion, you can choose what model that you want to use. But there's also a lot of great platforms like N8N and Zapier and other things that you can use to stitch things together. But yeah, it's definitely a whole new world.
Yeah, but we go in with the mindset of these big companies are just going to take more and more footprint of the market. Whatever you say they're not good at today, they will mostly be good at in a few months. That's just the mindset I have when I look at investment. And I'd rather think like that and be wrong than think otherwise and then be really wrong.
Right.
Yeah, it is a little terrifying right now investing in AI companies. You're not sure.
Yeah, you're not sure
Yeah.
who's going to go into their space for sure.
Yeah.
And it's, I think last week, Anthropic, I think, announced a similar feature to Figma. Where you
Yeah,
can
the guy
do
was on the
design.
board, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And so, yeah, no, it's
Yeah,
terrifying.
we talked a lot about that because we looked at 2 AI for product designer companies just a month ago.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
Crazy.
Yep.
And I saw a funny tweet, like the co-founder of Deal, it's like an HR platform.
Yes.
It's like basically like pleading to Anthropic publicly, don't interrupt us.
Don't go with our space.
and they were like the fastest growing SaaS company of all
Ever.
times or
Yeah,
something.
for sure. Yeah, no, it's crazy.
Yep.
No, it's hard to know. We definitely think about it a lot internally in terms of where we can try to build moats. You have to believe that the large model companies are going to focus more broadly. But like you said, they're going to pick certain verticals and they're going to go into them deep. And so do you have proprietary data? Do you have some sort of UI, UX experience? You talked about Cursor earlier. Cursor isn't building their own models. They're just leveraging the existing models, but everybody is using Cursor. And there's a reason for that. It's because they built a UI around the models that make it much more easy, elegant for engineers to use. And so there are opportunities, but you have to be nimble, you have to move fast, and you need to try to figure out where your strengths are.
Yeah. Good advice. Anything else, guys, before we wrap?
I think that's it.
Maybe a good way to wrap up. So thanks for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.